Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're here. It's the end of the first season of Mushrooms and Men. I am one of your hosts, who's also one of the hosts of the Game of Thrones House of Dragon show that my friend here, Yashar, my co-host, the co-host of this, him and I did that show as well. And we're at the end here of this show now of Mushrooms and Men, a Last of Us podcast. What a shame, right? That the season had to end out if there are only 9 episodes.
It's over, and like our friend Shrek once said, it ain't ogre till it's ogre.
It ain't ogre until Merle gets murdered, folks.
Yeah, but I think this was the episode that was maybe the one I was most anticipating because I wanted to see how closely they stayed towards the story of the game, and I think they were pretty close to it. Actually, we can go into more of the specifics. Also, just random shout out: this and last episodes were directed by Ali Abbasi, who's a Persian director, my people, who also happened to direct a really weird, like Norwegian or Swedish movie called Beast or something like that. I watched a few years ago with trolls. Why am I mentioning this? It's called Border, about a border patrol agent who's actually a troll. It's cool. He also directed this movie that just came out recently called Holy Spider, that is about a serial killer of prostitutes in the name of Allah in Mashhad, which is where my dad was born, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I watched that last night. So I got a lot of Ali Abbasi in my veins right now.
You're repping the Persia right here, brother. Yeah. We see, that's the thing. I grew up. You and I grew up together in a fairly mixed community of people. But I never heard you say Iran growing up. You always said I'm Persian. You realize that?
Yeah, bro. I still say Persian.
I know, and I know why. I understand why.
Because I'm trying not to get deported, man.
I am Caucasian, as far as you know.
Legally, I am Caucasian.
Right. On this episode, we're, like Yashar kind of mentioned in the lead up, we're going to be talking about the final episode of the first season of this show, Look for the Light, the final episode of the first season of The Last of Us. So like you mentioned, it's directed by Ali Abbasi, and once again, written by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. And what happens this episode? Well, we finally get to where Joel and Ellie have been heading this whole time. We get to the Fireflies in Salt Lake City, where if you've never seen the Book of Mormon, it's a long story.
It's been a long time since I've seen
in Salt Lake City. That's all I could think of when they're fucking saying it over and over again. That's all I could think of was Book of Mormon. God damn you, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. But we get to where we're going. Finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, because if you know anything about this game, you know that the ending of the game is kind of controversial is not the word I would use, but shocking. Like, I don't know. Well, the story makes it very clear what's going to happen. I think it's more impressive that the game, when given the opportunity to actually do it, actually does the thing that most of these things would not do. Well, the game does it, but we didn't know if the show was going to do it because, again, they have made changes. They did say the show and the game end in the same spot, but that doesn't mean they're going to do the same thing. The show, like you mentioned, more or less copies the game. One for one, even at least the last couple bits of the game are more or less shown to you on screen, sans the going and killing everybody. And we'll get to that because they do show that. And I think it's a little excessive, to say the least, maybe. I think it's a little much, but I get why they did it the way that they did.
Yeah. I mean, so let's, obviously the final 20 or so minutes is, I think, what most people are going to think about. The episode does open up with Ellie, like, clearly traumatized by what she's seen and done with David in the previous episode. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic because, like, we've generally seen her, like, pretty happy-go-lucky, even when she's done some, like, fucked up, arguably sadistic things in the past that have hinted at a potentially darker side to her. And Joel's basically just, like, doing the let's talk around it thing, because, like, they both can't be, like, fully open to one another. Like, even when he tells her, like, about his suicide, he's like, oh, I did, that thing. And she's like, I'm happy you didn't do it. And he essentially said, without saying, you're the reason I've found, like, a purpose now, to Ellie. So, like, I enjoyed those character moments. The giraffe thing was taken actually straight from the game. And I thought the giraffe was CG turns out the giraffe is real. Everything around it was CG. I don't know. How'd you feel about like the opening?
You didn't mention the biggest part of the opening. Ladies and gentlemen, we get to see now we get to see the second member of the video game cast. I know, sure, but let's be real here. This is the actual video game person who's really given anything to do in the entire show. Yeah. Talking about Ashley Johnson, who does the voice for Ellie in The Last of Us 1 and 2, and who the character in the second game is modeled after. Definitely not in the first. We swear it's not based off of anybody else. It's just a composite who totally looks like somebody who was in a movie called Juno. We promise, not the same actress. But in The Last of Us 2, Ashley Johnson is more. You can even see her facially more in the character, just like Troy Baker in the second game.
She's also closer in age to like that Ellie.
But we get to see her as Anna, who is Ellie's mom, giving birth to Ellie and then being murdered by Merle. Dandridge, who plays Marlene again, because she plays Marlene in the video game and in the show. I guess Marlene is probably the
she's
biggest.
Playing herself.
Yeah.
So I really like the opening because it gave like a definitive answer why Ellie was immune, and that's she was basically via umbilical cord, because she basically was given birth at the same moment, more or less, her mother was bitten. So it's like, it's kind of yada yada, but essentially that transmits some sort of sensor that to other infected makes her appear like one, plus gives her an immunity to it, which is, why not? Makes sense. I buy it.
Well, why didn't anybody realize that?
So here's the thing. Remember when Marlene comes, she says, "Oh, I cut the umbilical cord before I was bitten." And even though Marlene, like, you're not sure if she trusts it, she repeats, she's like, "I cut it before." And she's saying like, "Hey, take this baby. You're my best friend." So like Marlene, similarly to Ellie at the end, I think knows it's sort of bullshit, but goes with it because of the love for that person.
Sure.
And then also like, because she's never bitten beforehand, like Marlene, and obviously doesn't turn, Marlene probably at that point thinks, okay, I guess she did cut it before she was bitten, and probably doesn't think any of it. I did, however, think based on the end of the episode, you could just, get a lot of pregnant women about to give birth and have them.
That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying what we're both thinking, and that's not from the game. That is not from the game, because in the game they kind of yada yada what they're trying to do to Ellie in the game, in the surgery part. Merle Dandridge plays Marlene. If I refer to her as Merle at any point, you'll know who I'm talking about. In the game, there's none of the and this is how this and this is in the brain, and there's none of that. Yeah. It's just we're doing this. Okay.
Well, they say it's in the brain, but we don't have the context of how our immunity happened. But nothing in this contradicts that being. And right. Neil Druckmann said this was always his plan. He just never had an opportunity to display. He was maybe going to do it in a comic book or like a short film. So I think for all intents and purposes, this is how it worked. It's not like a change where the affected being communal and one person can set up a whole thing. That's new to the show. But the thing about the mother passing it on at the moment of birth, that is, not to sound nerdy, but canon. It seems like that was the original intent.
Not to be a nerd or anything. Oh, fuck you. Be a fucking nerd, please. Oh, I know. I'd rather you be the guy who's very disinterested and pretends he doesn't like things. Do that instead.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
But thank you. I did really enjoy that scene, and I like that it gave a little bit more, from the game, this, and from the show, this. Yes, Marlene and Ellie have a relationship that's lasted a long time, but Marlene has put her with Fedra, right? She hasn't really taken care of her herself. She's put her in a place that's safe, and also the people she's fighting, which I find an interesting. I think there's something to be said about what that says about Marlene.
Sure,
but I guess the point is we know that Marlene really cared about Ellie's mother. And does care about Ellie. I mean, probably doesn't see her as necessarily as a daughter like Joel does, but definitely isn't taking the decision she's making in this episode lightly.
No, I appreciate that there's an opening scene, a cold open. Once again, I like I like that they have Ashley Johnson finally in the show. I mean, I think we probably been waiting for it. I mean, we knew it was coming because how could you have Troy Baker in the show and not have Ashley Johnson? Remains to be seen if they'll be in the next season. I don't think so. I guess this is the one time they're in the show. Kind of.
So they're all dead now.
Yeah, it's kind of strange unless they just show up as other characters, but this isn't a show from the 70s. So.
Also, fun fact, one of the nurses was played by the actress who plays Abby, who we won't get into the details, but she is she is one of the main characters of, we can say she's one of the main characters of 2. So I'm sure we'll see that actress probably play a role in.
Can I posit something here? Controversial. I think this episode wasn't very good. I think this episode was a poor way to end the show. Hold on. I think it was rushed comparatively to everything else that we saw. I think that they had an interesting story beat that they took and did something with at the beginning of the episode with the two of them and having that conversation. It gets interrupted, obviously, because they have to hew close to the game, right? The game and the show end the same. And we'll talk about the ending. I posit here an unpopular opinion, not because I have any opinion about the second game, but I know what the second game is and the story that it tells. Fucking ignore the second game and do your own thing with this show. I'm dead serious. You want to know why? There's nobody who wants to see what happens to Joel in the video game happen to Pedro Pascal. No matter how bad of a character he's written to be in the game, he's not in the show. He's just not. The
second game's about consequences. We won't get into the story, but the second game is about consequences.
But the character of Joel in the show is not gray like the character is in the game. Well, and I know you know that, and I know everybody who's played the game knows that while watching the show. And that's the thing that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin couldn't bring themselves to do, which was have the person who's playing Joel actually kind of be off-putting, not physically off-putting, but just kind of gruff and a little abrasive towards Ellie. I mean, they do come around eventually, but the character of Pedro Pascal's Joel in the show, like, I don't know, man. You know what I'm getting at, because like it is a different feel to the show, the way that they go about resolving this kind of decision that his character makes, but it leaches into everything that they've done throughout this entire show.
I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I agree. They've even said they tried to soften Joel up. Although, with the David episode, we saw him take darker turns, and he said he's done bad things.
But we haven't saying seen it, but telling and showing are two different things.
We did see it when he tortured those guys.
And you and I said what? What did we say? It came out of nowhere, and it felt unearned because they had only done it that one time. Yeah. To set us up for, let me ask you, did they do it then an episode ago to set us up for this and only this? Because they had been doing such a good job of laying the seeds of everything else throughout the season. And then it's like, we forgot Joel's actually kind of a morally ambiguous character. But by the way, the things that he was doing, those people were terrible people. Nobody's going to defend what they were doing. They tried to kill Ellie and they were turning her over to their cannibal overlord. Like, as far as I'm concerned, he killed him, but okay.
I guess I'm of two minds. On one hand, I'm like, okay, they didn't pull punches. Like, they could have done it where, yes, he kills people, he lies to Ellie, they escape, and like there's still consequences of lying to Ellie and stopping the potential salvation of humanity. But maybe he does it in a softer way. Maybe he only kills almost like self-defense, or you could make it a bit more palatable. Or they just have him essentially like rampage and just turn into just an automaton. Like, it's like John Wick, basically. And like, where it's really hard, even if you understand his love for Ellie, to justify like the level of like destruction he causes. And so I really do have mixed opinions on it based on how they've built him up in the show. But I think coming in as someone who wanted to see it adapted, so from the perspective of someone who's seen the game, I think I appreciate that they just went for it in the finale, but maybe they shouldn't have softened him up as much earlier on. And I think that's a valid criticism.
Because the character of Joel in the game kind of has it coming in the second game, because he's just like, yeah, I did it. Like, okay, like you made the decision, fine. But like, you're kind of you're more morally ambiguous than he is here. And it's like, maybe it's just, again, I go back to something we've been saying this whole time. It's hard to root against Pedro Pascal, motherfuckers. Like, why do you cast someone this charismatic as your lead and then be like, we need some shades of gray here? I'm not saying Pedro Pascal can't do it. That's not the point. It's just, he's too likable. He's too lovable. He's like a,
is he lovable now?
He's like a meme now on the internet.
Yeah, but I didn't leave this episode being like, oh, he's so cuddly. Like, I was like,
I was kind of like, it was kind of cringe at the end. Yeah. But like that in and of itself was kind of bizarre because he's like, all of a sudden starts mentioning his dead daughter. And it's like, cringe, bro. Like, why are you going here? Like, it just felt, it felt like post climax. It was a different character even.
It's weird because like before the hospital scene, he's almost the softest he's ever been, the most vulnerable.
And that's great. Open. And that is fantastic. Yeah. But then afterwards, it's this weird bullshit of like, you would have liked my daughter. Like, what the fuck writing is this? Like, who's writing this scene? Like, it's like out of some old Western all of a sudden where it's like, you would have liked old Sarah. She scampered up rocks and stuff. It's like, this is weird, dude. Like,
I actually think it's a bit real. Like, he's clearly mentally distressed, traumatized, probably has PTSD among a litany of other things we can't even fathom. And like he's compartmentalizing. And we actually see him compartmentalize before, even when he's being open with Ellie, he's still not being completely truthful. He can't like I mentioned, he can't even tell her you're the reason I'm like, I have a purpose to live. Like, so it does continue that him talking around the thing in the search of comfort. So I think had less of a problem with that. But I mean, do you want to talk about the hospital sequence?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So you tell me, because I haven't gone to this point in the game yet. You tell me how close to the game it is first, because that's something I'm obviously curious of. Outside of watching it on YouTube and experiencing as someone playing the game are two very different things.
So in the game, you take Ellie to the hospital. I don't remember if you get knocked out or whatever on the way, but that's neither here nor there. You take her to the hospital. She goes. Now I'm going to say Merle. Marlene.
Gotcha. You too, buddy.
Got me. And like a similar conversation, Marlene, comes to Joel and says, we're prepping her for surgery. And Joel's like, what surgery? And she basically says, like, this is the only way. She says in the show, I think as well, it's not 100%, but the doctor thinks that we can do something, to potentially come up with a cure or vaccine or some sort of treatment for this. So we do know it's not 100%. Like that is clear in the game. It's maybe a little less clear in the show, but she says we think there's a solution.
The show makes it seem like this is going to succeed if it happens.
Yeah. The show, I think, comes a little stronger, whereas in the game, it's like it probably will, but it's not 100%. But regardless, like this is the closest humanity has had to a cure for this plague that's consumed the last 20 years of the world. And obviously, it's like the trolley problem on steroids, right? You know the trolley problem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run over one to save 100 or save one and let 100 die. Like,
yeah. I mean, so, and we know that Marlene is a Firefly. She can sacrifice hers for a greater cause. So that makes sense. Whereas Joel, we've established like Ellie is everything. She is Sarah part 2. He has nothing without her. So I understand why he would not want her to do that and like be the way he is. But in the game, you get a gun and you just start mowing dudes down in the hospital, and it leads to you coming up, shooting the doctor who just pay attention to the fact that they lingered on the doctor a bit for season 2. Only difference is you actually kill the nurses in the game. you let them live in the show, but it wasn't like
you don't have to kill them in the game.
Do you not?
Wow! Fuck them all, bro. Time to die. I watched multiple videos of the finale of the game where you don't have to kill everybody, but the one. Right, bro. They were begging for their life. They had a scalpel. You saw it.
So, and then you take Ellie. She wakes up in the car, and you basically give her this bullshit about they couldn't. They did the tests. It wouldn't work. We left. Marlene's busy. Haha. And then, Ellie asks, is that actually what happened? And Joel says, like, I swear. And then, Ellie's like, okay, like in a way that it's the way you say okay when, I don't know, you just walked in on your partner, fucking the pool boy. And
okay.
Like, are you cheating on me? And you're like, okay. I say this as a former pool boy.
Simply stunning. That's all I can say to you on that one. The show is more or less that.
Yeah, I mean, they don't say, hey, let's come up with a more palatable way of, Joel dooming humanity potentially for his selfish gains, but maybe he doesn't have to kill that many people. It's like, no, Joel like shoot people in the back, shoot people that are running. I mean, the way he kills Marlene is pretty rough. Like, she comes up to them. Marlene says, hey, Joel, like, I'm essentially willing to forgive that you've iced 30 of my people, killed, the doctor, who maybe you shouldn't be killing doctors in a time like this. Just give her back. And Joel shoots her and then comes back and double taps because he's like, I don't want to risk any shot of more risk to Ellie. Like, I don't want any loose ends. I'm going to kill the person who may even represent, depends on your perception of the Fireflies, but the best shot at even beyond just a cure, but like a new democracy. And so like in that moment, Joel dooms humanity to the status quo.
And that's not what Ellie would have wanted.
No. And I think Marlene says it. I don't think she says it manipulatively. I think she's like, she knows Ellie, right? Like she's been around Ellie her whole life. And I think we know Ellie generally would do the right thing. And I think in a case like this, like Ellie probably would say, yes, I'm willing to be sacrificed for this and have my life mean something. Like, she's been looking for meaning. She never had family. And yeah, she doesn't get to make that choice.
So how do you feel about the ending, just in general? Now that here's your opportunity to wax poetically about a game from 20. That's ending its ending is now being enjoyed by 10x people than it was before.
I absolutely, like, as a person who, just my inner moral compass was just on fire. Like, I hated Joel after this. Like, I really did. And, maybe it's cognitive dissonance because in the game you do some pretty bad things and you kill probably some not that guilty people. But I don't know, it seems in the context of this greater good always, this is just pure selfishness. And the fact that he is willing to doom all of humanity for this and he kills so many people on the way, it was really hard for me to swallow. And I listened to the Last of Us podcast that Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann do after every episode. And something interesting, I think Neil Druckmann said, he was like, when he asks people, it's usually 50-50. Like 50% of people say, like, I get it. Like, I actually would have done the same thing Joel did. 50% like, no, he's a monster. But he says when he asked parents, almost universally, they said they would have done what Joel would do. And that kind of goes back to that theme we talked about of love. Like, just because something is love doesn't make it good. And this is Joel's love for Ellie. But it's, I think, the worst side of love. And it reminds me of just like general conflict where someone is like, oh, you hurt the person that hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you back. And it just like leads to the cycle of violence. And I feel like a similar thing, except Joel happens to have the cycle of violence be, I'm going to make sure humanity never gets a cure for this virus. I don't know. What are your thoughts? How did you feel about it? I know you knew about the ending, but you've never really seen it play out. It's one of those things where I read about what the ending was in 2013, and I just thought to myself, I was like, holy shit, who's making this game? It's like, oh, right, it's the people that are making Uncharted. Maybe they could actually put some of that storytelling prowess into Uncharted, and they did. So like you just said, I missed out when this was the topic of discussion 10 years ago. So coming to it 10 years later, knowing everything that we know now, because again, I can't experience the ending in a Last of Us 2-less universe. You know what I mean? Because as someone who's dialed in like you are, I know where this is going if they go the way that it's going. So I can't not think about that. So to try and remove all of that from the equation as much as I can, because that matters, it really does. The right decision and the wrong decision aren't what's important here, right? It's whether, and Craig Mazin says it aptly in that after the episode, he says, you need to just understand why Joel gets to the decision that he does. Because thankfully, up until this point, knock on wood, none of us have had to make this kind of decision. And hopefully we'll never have to. So in my mind, it's less about would I make that decision? I look at it more, did you get me to the point where I can understand why this character is making this decision in the scope of the narrative? And does this make narrative sense? And it does. It's, if you play the game, I don't know how you could think it's going to end any other way. And if you're watching the show, I don't know how you could think it could end any other way once she says, we have to kill her to make whatever it is
Like, we have to take her brain out of her body, bro, and like fuck around with it. Like, she's not getting it back. This ain't no fucking return, catch and release shit. I understand why Joel makes the decision that he does. Would I make the same decision to doom humanity? It might be easier for me to make the decision to let Ellie live and run off and kill all the Fireflies, only because humanity's already fucking doomed. Like,
and Joel says like he has nothing else to live for. Like he doesn't give a fuck about humanity. Like he cares about one thing, Ellie. And like his brother is in a good situation in Jackson, so like he's fine. So yeah, from Joel's perspective, this like the rest of everyone else doesn't really matter.
Right. And in a lot of ways, like for me, that's probably where I would come from. Less of like a parent and child thing, but it's more like, fuck them. Like, fuck everybody else. Fuck them. Like, if you're my ride or die, I'm not giving you up to save everybody else. Like, and I get that decision. That's a decision I would be willing to make personally. I would make that decision 100 times if given 100 opportunities, if it were my wife or people close to me. Like, I would be like, yeah, fuck the rest of everybody else. And you know what?
Note to self, do not put the fate of humanity in Chris Dasch's hands.
Don't put the fate of humanity in any human's hands because you think anybody's going to make the right decision. People say they will. People will say whatever.
I think Marlene was
a character in a show, sure, but I'm talking about a real person in the real world is going to make decisions more in line with what Joel did. Unless you again, like that's the thing. The decision that Marlene is asking Joel to make, she knows he's not going to make that decision the moment she sees him freak out when she says,
that's why,
Joel,
she escorts him out.
Right. Because she's like, oh shit. Like this is about to get real bad. She should have just shot his ass. You want me to be perfectly honest? That's how this game should have ended. Marlene goes, bang. Now we can do whatever the fuck we want. And Joel's dead. Like,
I mean, yeah. She did show like some compassion.
Right. And if it's me, like that's her mistake is what he took advantage of. Because if it had been me and I had seen someone react that way, I would like, bang, nope, not even gonna fucking do this. You have transported her from, she knows what he's capable of. Like, that's the thing. I'm not saying it's not Joel's fault. Joel ultimately makes the decision, but Joel's also put in a pretty advantageous position to make that decision as the character in this. Like, if it's me, I'm Marlene, like I'm fucking utilitarian to the end, fuck him. Like if he's going to do this and he knows what the score is, then he doesn't deserve to be here. And it's not, I'm going to let you walk into a stairwell by yourself with armed guards. Hardy har har. I'm a James Bond villain. This could never end poorly. I would never do that. I'd be like, I'm going to shoot you myself because see, you now want to leave the fate of humanity in my hands because I'll make the fucking decision that she couldn't. That's the other part of this. Like, that's the part that nobody else talks about is how do you make a decision like this when you're also given the opportunity to make that decision? Joel's given the opportunity to make a decision in the game and in the show. Marlene gives him that opportunity. If Marlene were really committed to the cause, she would have fucking killed his ass. And I just like, again, not to blame a character, but that's kind of a plot hole that's glaring, isn't it?
She should have been. I don't know if I would call that a plot hole because I do think like her word is important to her and like.
So her word is more important to her than saving humanity is. All right. Well, so someone else is making it, but she's making a decision based on her own morals. Right?
But I mean, in her mind, she's like, I have 2 armed guards on him. I've told them shoot to kill if he gives you like any inkling. And there's a bit of like the superhero, plot armor to Joel.
And that is a problem because in the show, they essentially have to make him the Terminator. Like, because in the game, you're essentially the Terminator, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, but that's any game where you're killing lots of people, but...
Right, but there's a better way to do it in the show that doesn't make it feel so plot armory. Like...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it definitely feels a little plot armory, and, like, there's a lot of bodies. Like, they're really emphasizing, like, he has killed a lot of people, and probably not even all, even if you agree with his decision, necessarily.
Yeah. And it's in a lot of ways it's Deus Ex Joel. Like he escapes and just kills everybody. Like you said, like who knows what families those people had.
Yeah, and I mean they seemed like half those people were just chilling right in this hospital, being like, like I just hear gunshots. Like
I wish they had given that scene some more weight, like even more weight than they gave it, because it needs to be apparent that Joel is not doing the right thing by the Fireflies. Again, right and wrong in this scenario. Like at this point, when the world's over, right and wrong are fucking gone. Like that's why it's like, did he make the right call or the wrong call? Like, guys, civilization's more or less already been destroyed. So how it's like the thing with the alcohol. Like, why do you care if a 15-year-old drinks a bottle of alcohol when there's literal monsters roaming the wasteland? Like, I just have a hard time understanding.
You're never gonna let them live that one down.
It doesn't make any sense. Does it? Does it actually make sense?
I mean, you still have it's not like they don't have any rules in their little societies. It's not like, yo, we should all be shooting up heroin at 10 or whatever just because the greater society doesn't exist. Like
there were some people that had to have been like,
oh, I'm sure there were, but I don't know. Like I could still see some general. I mean, there are general rules like Fedra, and Jackson was like a well organized place. Like kids are going to school. Like by that say, well, why do the kids need to go to school? Like,
well, those people made the decision to keep going on with society the way it was before, but that is in and of itself a choice as well.
Yeah.
If it's you, let me ask you: if you're in the post apocalypse, are you going to go live in a city with electricity and all that bullshit?
Fuck yeah.
Why?
Because I want electricity and bullshit.
I would not want to be anywhere near anybody else. Fuck that. Everybody else is a liability. They are. They kind of are. They kind of are. In this society, more people are kind of a liability.
All right, SVB. It's liabilities. Okay. Wow. It's a balance sheet joke.
Simple stunning. But you know what I mean? Like other people kind of are a liability. Like,
yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, it depends obviously on like, is it a well-organized thing like Jackson, or is it just like random people living in a house here or there? But like, yeah, if I could have Tommy's set up, I would definitely do that.
I don't know. Like I understand where Joel's coming from the idea of like hanging on to vestiges of the old society maybe aren't. I don't know. Like maybe in this, it doesn't matter here.
Yeah.
Look, he makes it. I understand why he makes the decision he makes. I think they did a good enough job writing us up into the edge and then jumping off the cliff. And I understand why they jumped off the cliff and the decision they made landed. And I've been reading reviews of the show and I don't see anybody complaining about the ending. They're complaining about other things, like the rushed pace of the last 2 episodes of the show.
Yeah, and this you could say is rushed. Definitely, I feel like less rushed than the last episode. But I think the to your point, yeah, Joel being this violent was a bit of a thing that caught me a little off guard, but in the context of the themes that the show has been subtly and very not subtly, like the Bill and Frank stuff, putting in front of us, like about how important it is to protect the ones you care about. Love will make us do things good and bad. It makes sense thematically. It brings the whole story like fully circle. It does change your perception. Not for everyone watching the show, but it does change your perception of Joel. And I'm not going to get into where I think next season's going to go because, like, I know the story of the second one. But like,
I do want to get into it at some point because there's no guarantee it's just going to tell the second game.
No, but they did. Okay, so Craig Mason and Neil Druckmann did say it's going to follow a similar thing where they're going to get the core story from the game and then, maybe spend more time with characters or other things off the beaten path. But the core story, they said, is going to be similar. But they did say it's going to span over multiple seasons, which I think you and I spoke about. And the way the second game is structured probably makes sense. It's just a longer game, but the narrative structure also has like a couple clear turning points where you could see it probably, I would imagine, 2 seasons. Could maybe do it in 3 seasons, but 1 season would be tough to tell that story.
There's part of me that just wants this to be it. I know it's not. I know we're getting another season, but this is a pretty good standalone season of TV, wouldn't you say? Even with the rushed last 2 episodes.
Yeah. I mean, the first game was supposed to be standalone, right? So like we know it told essentially the same story, and it was satisfying in the fact that it's really well told, well made, well acted, gives us something new. Left me unsatisfied in the context of I was like, damn, Joel's just going to get away with it, huh? And you feel like, you feel that in the show. So the second game is about like reckoning with Joel's actions, which you don't get in the like playing just the first game. You're just like, oh, this thing happens, and he kind of like just dooms humanity and goes on with his life. Whereas the second game asks the question we learned about love. This is like, what are consequences of like said love and selfishness, blah, 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 blah. And how does that impact relationship? That's the theme of 2.
Well, and that and rage and revenge
and anger
and anger. And that's the thing that I struggle with seeing how they're going to get these two actors to that point where they are now. Like those two, like it's either going to have to be a very slow burn, which is what I assume they're going to do, or a lot of shit's going to happen in the in-between time of now and the next time we see the show again. But there will be a time jump in that real life time period as well, where they kind of, again, they have to sow the seeds of, and they already have, of Ellie doesn't believe Joel. Great. Now, where do we go from here?
We see that. Yeah, we see that. Yeah.
And where do we go from here is the question. Like, that's literally what you're left hanging with at the end of the episode is Ellie saying, okay, to Joel feeding her a big bag of bullshit.
And the thing is she's saying okay in the context of like, I love Joel and he generally has what's, in my best interest, and I'll just go along with this because why not? Or is it okay? Like something's off. I don't trust him. I mean, we'll see more of that play out. And I think in the second game, Joel's a bit actually calmer, whereas like Ellie grows into more of her own and becomes, I think, more similar to Joel it was in the first whatever, like personality. Like I'm interested to see how that personality dynamic plays. There's like a 4 or 5 year gap in the game, something like that. There's a good chunk. I don't know if they're just going to jump straight into that gap, or we'll have like episodes filling that information, or just having flashbacks. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they can take it.
Well, and I think that I'm worried about the second and third season of this show, as I know you kind of are too, because it's just so fucking different in like a way that like I think even the people that are watching this show might not appreciate. Like the people who are watching the show that have never played the game, because that is a large group of people, I don't think they would like that second game any more than a lot of the people who played that second game did.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think I could see the second season being maybe a bit more traditional, but if the third season goes like how I think.
You want to know how I would do the second season? I would have the second season open and be only Abby and her pals the entire season, and it ends where the game kind of has that hard pivot. But you don't see Joel, you don't see Ellie for the entire season. And that is how you make a third season of this show, like the second half of the second game, actually matter, because all of a sudden you see people you recognize, and then
you understand
where this is going, what are the stakes, who are the people. Because again, I don't need to see Ellie and Joel again for a while, frankly, because that needs to sit and simmer on the stove and get to a boiling point of its own again, because it will, and it does. And what happens with the characters in the second game force a reckoning with or without the characters that are involved in a lot of ways. And I think if it's me and you doing the show and someone's like, you have to do the second season of this show, but it has to be the second game, I would not adapt the second game. I just wouldn't. I would do something else entirely. I just would.
Just have like a completely, maybe still have it be about consequences, but in a different way.
Yeah. Like, again, like, you know what I mean? Like, I like Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal a lot together. I think they make an interesting dynamic together. And I mean, where the show is going, there ain't a lot of that left. It's a lot of characters doing things on their own, and other machinations that are going on. So that's what I would do, though, because again, that second game is so tonally different, so narratively disjointed, that you can split it up into 2 seasons, maybe, like you said, even 3 if you want to go completely.
If they want to do like everything. If they wanted to just everything in the second game, you probably could do. I feel like that would be a lot, but
right, because there are like whole sections of that game that would be like 1 episode and that's it. But I think it's nice that this is as good as it is, and it stands alone, and it does tell a whole complete story, and that when it ends on that moment of uncertainty, not only for the characters but also for Ellie and Joel, the two of them. Because it's not just uncertainty about where's the show going for us, the audience, but there's a level of uncertainty with Ellie about her feelings towards Joel, a character that we have seen her fall in love with throughout the 8 episodes up until this point.
Yeah. So, I mean, your thoughts on the overall season? Then you liked it. You're in.
I think the last 2 episodes were the weakest part of the season overall. I think that the last episode it rushed through its hard-hitting climax, and not because it wanted to, but because it just didn't have enough time. Like they just ran out of time is what it feels like. Like you had 10 hours to play the game and you got 9.5 hours in and you got to the climax of 30 minutes left and that's all we gave you. Like,
did you want more time in the hospital or what?
I don't know. I think I wanted them to give the stuff. Okay. And I've seen this complaint a couple times. And I think it's I'm going to complain and critique it from a different direction. I've seen people critiquing it, as I'm sure you have, where they go, there weren't enough infected in the show. There wasn't enough infected action. Here's where my directional kind of criticism would stem from. The decision that Joel makes, I understand why they get to that point in the show and in the game. But in the game, the infected feel like a threat. In the show, they really don't. And it's not because we haven't had enough action scenes and shit, but like post Kansas City, we've had very little.
Yeah, I agree.
We've actually had we had one in this episode in the flashback with Ellie's mom.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. But it's not a clicker, but it's not it's just like a run of the mill infected. I don't think that the zombie show needed more zombies. I fucking saw that criticism and my eyes rolled inside of my head and did 360 because it's like, A, we've mentioned this, not a zombie show. B, if you're tuning in for that, that's not the intent of the showrunners at all. Craig Mazin even like says that multiple times. He's like, there's a lot of action in the game, but like we couldn't find purposeful reasons for it in the show. I'm not looking for more action, but I am looking for you in the show telling me why the decision Joel made dooms everybody when like the threat, they're kind of getting along just fine with just managing it. We gave up the cities. Oh no.
Like it's not nearly where we are now, but it's like enough people do have decent systems where generally people are living okay lives if you're in one of the good Fedra places, or you happen to have a Jackson situation, or you happen to have a cannibal pastor, potential pedophile leader, you know.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like it depends on where you are. Things are good or bad anyways, but that's the way it is now. Like in real life, like I mean, again, like in a lot of ways,
Medicare for all in Fedra.
Right. That's the issue I have with this show and the infected is the decision that Joel makes is meant to feel like this big condemnation of humanity and a kind of pushing up on the pedestal of love the one you're with and, worry about them and don't worry about humanity, which again works perfectly fine if you make me understand the state humanity is in actually needing something, that this threat is overwhelming. The infected are kind of just there hanging out. And like they make a point in saying like, oh, clickers, you survived fighting a clicker. Like, holy shit, these things are just like killing people then, right? Or no, like, or people just aren't seeing them. Like, again, like it's not made clear in the show.
I think it's more for like before the people had like the good, well fortified, because now people generally have like these fortified areas, with walls and guards and stuff. But if you're like just on your own, or you're in a place that has been overrun by them, your situation is not great. But it has been 20 years, so these people do have like these like pockets of like we know their patterns and we can generally protect ourselves with enough weapons and ammo and stuff like that. But yes, it is a lot of tell us, but we don't really see it. We see it in the first half of the series, but not really the second.
Yeah. I mean, the most we see with the infected is in Boston with Tess.
Kansas City.
Well, but also in Boston with Tess.
Yeah, Tess.
Because they fight the clickers. They fight the clickers in Boston, and then they fight the bloater in Kansas City, which nobody like mentions. Hey, wasn't that fucking thing wild that we just fought? Like nobody at any point is like, hey, what about that thing that ripped that dude's head apart? Like, where was any? Like, it's just weird. Like the infected are kind of an afterthought in a show where the decision that's made at the end of the story is about the infected and like their consequences on the world. And like, how are we surviving in a world that's so destroyed by these creatures? Oh, we're kind of just hanging on, but we have a way to fix it. And this guy fucking screws all of us. Like there's less of the we're just barely getting by part of this than I was expecting. And I think that stems from a lack of the infected.
That's fair.
I mean, that's right. Like, and again, like that's an easy thing to fix. I think Mazin and Druckmann said it as much in their like post things. They were like, we're going to put more infected in the second season. Like, yeah, I bet. Probably.
Yeah. And it makes it, I get what you're saying. You're saying like, we know the infected are this like bad thing that's a scourge on humanity, but we haven't spent enough time to really understand how shitty it is. So it makes Joel's decision selfish, but like we haven't seen them in so long, we almost forget that there's this persistent problem. beyond just like living in a shitty house or not having supplies. It's like, well, the reason we can't have these things is because there's these fucking monsters everywhere.
Right. And there's like, again, like the show does a good job of telling us that, but it does not avail itself to show us that.
Yeah.
And again, like we saw with the Kansas City kind of 2-episode little stint, they have the infected were under control. And if they're focusing on keeping the infected under control elsewhere, it seems like they can just keep them under control. In Kansas City, they were kind of ignoring it, but other places they weren't. And so it's just, I don't know. It's just, I when I was reading those things about people complaining about not enough action in the show, I was like, oh my God, you are just looking for the wrong thing. But again, I feel like I'm kind of complaining about the same thing. I just feel like it's more of a like actual problem with the show is that the infected need to feel more like a threat, because we get it. The humans are bad. Like that has been made abundantly clear in almost every episode of the show that humans are not great in this world. But like, I would like to see more of how the infected are really an oppressive force that by Joel dooming everybody, like, you know, he's really dooming everybody. Like, it just doesn't seem like he's dooming everybody. It just seems like, you're just going to have to continue to live shitty lives, but not like constantly worrying about the infected coming in the night and murdering you. Because like, I don't know who's worrying about that in this universe because we haven't seen them. We've seen people worrying about like Bill and Frank. We've seen them worrying about raiders coming, but infected coming in the night and breaking in, like there's none of that. There's just the infected are not the threat that the game makes them out to be. And that's because the game gives you 20 plus hours of just fucking running around and sneaking around and smashing bricks on their heads and stabbing them with shivs. And I know that that's hard to recreate in a show, but some of that needed to be there just a little bit more, just to give us an idea that like, these are not just some piss ass threat that nobody cares about. Cause that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally makes sense.
So what are your final thoughts on the season as a whole?
Yeah. I mean, every episode wasn't perfect. I think there were some issues in like pacing in later episodes. And I think I agree a bit with the clicker criticism. I don't think we need a lot more, but a little bit more would have made that threat a bit more real. But yeah, I mean, this is a really solid, well-made show. I enjoyed every episode. Like even the bad episodes, like was like an enjoyable 40 minutes, hour of TV. You can tell a lot of thought and like, let's say love, but reverence for the source material went into it. I mean, obviously you have the director of the game as one of the writers. And I am looking forward to season 2. I think it's going to be a much more challenging thing to adapt. But I have faith that the approach that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin choose is going to be one that will reward. When I use the word reward in a broad way, but will reward the audience for sticking along and seeing what they do. And even if it just ended up being one season, like it was a great season, and it does leave you thinking and feeling in a way where I think a lot of other shows would just kind of wrap up, put a bow on it, and just say like, all right, we'll move on. Like I'm thinking about the ending still. And I still have the same opinion about it I did when I saw it in 2013. But I think I understand Joel a bit more. And I think that's the sign of a good show.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. And, you know, as someone who has been a video gamer since being a teenager or earlier, like I hope that this heralds in, and we've talked about this, a new age of video game adaptations, because people are going to undoubtedly do it, being done well and right. And with, I would say, the loving care of someone like Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. Because yeah, Neil Druckmann crafted the video game, but Craig Mazin, and like, I think the dude's obsessed with The Last of Us. Like he makes it right.
He's like, played it like 13 times or something like that. Like,
yeah, like, and good. Crazy. Like I as much as sometimes I want to say, don't be the guy who loves the thing that you're working on. Sometimes that is the right person. And that is the correct person to take a project like this and turn it not from a movie, but into a TV show. Because you know what we can both agree on? The movie's ending would not have had the impact that the show's ending and the game's ending did.
Yeah. It would have been more just action movie. Like, oh yeah, he killed these people. Cool. Like whatever.
That would have been the clickers and infected that people wanted would have been in the movie. Just like gobs and gobs of them. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I'm glad that this is a quiet, character drama that just happens to have some monsters. I was making jokes at the beginning of this show to people like, it's kind of just a zombie show. You'll be fine. And the first 3 episodes, the first 4 kind of are, maybe not the 3rd episode, but the 1st and 2nd and 4th are. But after that 5th episode, like, nope, it's like something else entirely.
Yeah.
Which is, again, not bad. I'm not complaining about it, but there are clearly people that didn't resonate with the slower, more character-driven parts of this show than they did with the action and the intense gunplay and whatever. Because again, like, I get it, but I don't know. My hope is that more video game things are as well made as this is, because this is now, as far as I'm concerned, the high watermark for video game stuff, at least in a long form narrative. Maybe not in a movie, because again, I don't know if the best video game movie has come out yet. I mean, we could throw names out there, but I think this is the best video game adaptation period now. Like,
I mean, I don't know if I'll stand for this Mortal Kombat Annihilation erasure, but
oh my fucking God. And you will die. That movie is such a wow. Stunt. That movie is so bad.
Wow.
I actually like that movie. The Wow movie.
Wow.
No, the Wow movie.
Oh, well, I've seen it. I thought
it was fine.
Fine, yeah. I don't remember much, but
remember how Duncan Jones directed that movie?
No, I didn't remember. Yes, he did direct that movie. He directed that, and then he directed Muse. I loved Moon, but what's he doing nowadays?
I don't know. Being David Bowie's son. Like, do you have to do more than that? I don't know, man. Like, video game things just had the longest, worst rap since that Super Mario Brothers movie. And it kind of feels oddly ironic that I would say the best video game adaptation to come out so far comes out and finishes the same weekend that the Super Mario Brothers movie comes out. So it is kind of an odd circularness, but I'm hoping that The Last of Us is now seen as the beginning point in a new age of video game adaptations. Because again, I don't care if they adapt video games. It's not for me for them to adapt things, but there is an audience for it. And there are plenty of people that will never pick up a controller that would love to see more of the stories from video games put onto the screen. And, God of War is coming and so many other things are coming. And these are narrative driven games, just like Last of Us. So we'll see. I'm excited. This is a fun show. It was a good show. And now I think we'll see ripples from this into the future of other things that are as good or better than this. I hope that the God of War show is better than this. Like, this is a pretty high watermark, but like, that has an opportunity to be better. There's plenty of things that can come out in the next decade that can be better than this. And maybe the second season of the show will be better. That's not unheard of. That's not uncommon that the second season of a show is even better than the first one. So I personally would like to see The Last of Us 2 adapted in a way that like really challenges the audience, because I think the season left you as an audience in a nice spot, even if the ending is kind of, you're not able to swallow it. It's challenging, but like, I still think that it leaves the audience with like a more or less like happy ending. At least it's Joel's happy ending. So I would like to see the next season and maybe third and however many seasons actually really challenge the audience and what they're expecting from TV shows. So
yeah,
I don't know. And we don't know when that's coming out, folks. Just like the Game of Thrones show, if you listen to that show and now you're listening to this one, we don't know when we're doing the next one of these. Could be a year from now, could be probably 2, I would assume 2 years.
I would say at least 18 months before we're seeing them.
I mean, if Craig Mazin is to be believed, he almost died while filming the show, and like his life was devoted to this. So give that man a break for like maybe a couple months. Let that man live his life, and then he'll go back to being obsessed with The Last of Us, which, hey, you know what? Great. So until the next time you hear the two of us, which again, like I just mentioned, we don't know when that will be. You can find the two of us over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show and the other show we did, Game of Bros House of the Dragon, are airing. I would assume that show is going to come back before this one. So I think it's just safe to say, though we may be doing miniseries back to back until these shows are over, given that they kind of aired around the same time. So, because Game of Thrones only finished up in like December, right? So
November, December, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where you can find the two of us. And as always, you can find this show wherever you get your podcasts, like, rate, and review the show. And if there's something to check in with, we'll check in. But expect that the next time you hear us, we'll be talking about The Last of Us Season 2.